Welcome to our Mintcast podcast, where we interview dissenting voices the establishment would rather silence and experts who can help us go behind the headlines to break through the fog of war. I'm Mnar Adley for Mint Press News, and today we're joined by Syed Mohammad Marandi, professor of English Literature and Orientalism at the University of Tehran. Dr. Marandi is a familiar face in Western media whose clips and statements have gone viral across the world. Dr. Marandi, welcome back to the show.
Thank you very much for inviting me. It's always a pleasure.
So we're going to get right to it and talk about what happened in Pakistan. So Trump went from declaring on, his social media that he will annihilate Iranian civilization to literally begging for negotiations. And I understand that you were actually in Pakistan for that one day of negotiations with the United States. Could you tell me what really happened there from your perspective and the Iranian perspective?
Sure. The Iranian delegation invited me. They asked me if I would go to deal with media. And of course, I would never say no. So it was a very sudden trip. They informed me like a couple of days earlier that there may be a trip. And then in the afternoon before the negotiations, I got a phone call and they said, be at the airport in an hour. And the airport is actually out of Tehran. It's like from where I am, it's a 2-hour drive. An hour and 15 minutes, but I had to get ready. So I said I probably won't be able to make it, but they asked me to just to go as quickly as possible. I made it to the airport, got there on time. I just want you to get how sudden all this was. So literally, I just got ready in a few minutes and got a car and went to the airport. At the airport, before the flight and during the flight, in my conversations with members of the delegation, members of the delegation, as well as a couple of the negotiators, it seemed to me that they were all skeptical that there would be any real progress. And when we got there, the next day, as the negotiations started, there was talk, the information that came from the negotiations, because we were in a different building. I was with the media, which was in a building close by to where they were negotiating. The information that we were receiving was that there was limited progress, but it seemed like the gap was pretty wide. And throughout the day, there were elements of progress, but ultimately, near the end of the day, the Americans sort of took a very hard line, and especially on key issues. And there were supposed to be negotiations the next day, but in the middle of the night, Vance effectively walked away and left. The Iranian side had full authority. Before the trip, the chief negotiator, who's the Speaker of Parliament, Dr. Ghalibaf, who's also a colleague of mine at the University of Tehran, he's an associate professor there. He spoke with the leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, Ayatollah Sayyid Mujtaba Khamenei, and they came to a conclusion as to what was supposed to be done. And when he was in Islamabad, he didn't need to make any phone calls. But despite the fact that Vance was surrounded on both sides by Kushner and Witkoff, he was constantly making phone calls. And one of the people who he called was Netanyahu. We also heard from Netanyahu himself that Vance called him and reported to him, which is an interesting way of putting it. The prime minister of this puny colony getting reports from the vice president of the United States. And of course, Netanyahu also said that I get reports from other American leaders every day. You'd think that in the United States this would be a scandal of sorts, but apparently not. So it was clear that Vance really didn't have a mandate and that he did not have the authority to really seriously negotiate. Also, while we were on our way there, or when we were there, I'm not quite sure when, the Washington Post published an opinion piece which called for the assassination of the Iranian negotiators, which of course meant the people who were on our flight. And so after the negotiations had ended without any achievement or any success or any agreement, we were pretty confident that on the way back, well, not pretty confident, we felt that there was a high chance that on the way back they would shoot down our plane. Yet to the credit of all those who came with the delegation, men and women, they all chose to fly back to Iran. And so that was basically it.
And do you mind if I just jump in really quick?
Sure.
Because I was going to read actually what it's Mark Thiessen. He's a fellow at the hawkish think tank American Enterprise Institute, and he's a former White House speechwriter. And he wrote an op-ed in the Washington Post, which we know is owned by Jeff Bezos. It's backed by the CIA, where he openly called for the assassination for the Iranian negotiating team. And this is quite significant that this is being published in an American newspaper, this beacon of so-called democracy and human rights, right? You know, we said that we're going to Iran to save people, but we're literally threatening to assassinate the Iranian negotiating team. And he openly wrote several demands, but the fourth one was the most interesting, which was he stated clearly that the United States should carry out a barrage of leadership strikes, eliminating the Iranian officials who had been spared for the purpose of negotiations. Iran's leaders must be made to understand that their lives literally depend on reaching a negotiated settlement to Trump's liking. If they refuse to do so, they will be killed. This is what Mark Thiessen wrote in the Washington Post. When you were going back home, did you feel fearful?
Not really. No, I mean, we thought that there was a strong possibility that they would shoot down our plane, but to be very blunt, to be very open about it, I wasn't fearful. I don't know if others were fearful. We were joking. On the way, people were joking about me on the way to Islamabad because I have a bounty on my head and a $1 million bounty from an Israeli Ukrainian group, apparently, and they put out a tweet, that promoted tweet on an account which a verified account to fundraise to have me kidnapped. And of course, once you're kidnapped, you know what happens next. You're tortured and killed. But so people and X refused to remove the tweet, let alone remove the account. I mean, the account and the tweet remained for a very long time, even though thousands of people complained. You'd think that the account itself would be deleted. And by the way, lots of Iranian accounts are being deleted right now. Big accounts with hundreds of thousands of followers, they're being deleted. So my account may disappear pretty soon. But in any case, this account that was calling for my kidnapping is still there, and it was fundraising to have me kidnapped. And so people on the plane were joking with me, like saying, maybe they have debts and they have they need the money, so they may kidnap me themselves. And then on the way back, I was joking with them, saying, "Well, you're going to die with me." So we were enjoying ourselves on the way and on the way back. I don't recall anyone being particularly frightened, but except for one or two people. who were, I think, a bit more apprehensive. But they were, anyway, one or two younger people.
Yeah.
So on the way back, there were some, maybe one or two people showed their fear, but the others, I didn't feel that they were at least showing anything that indicated they were fearful.
Well, it's clear that the Iranian people have showed that they don't fear death in this circumstance. I mean, look at the example of Sayyid Ali Khamenei. He stayed in his home. He didn't hide in a bunker. And the other politicians, Iranian politicians that were walking the streets, rallying with the people against U.S. bombs while their country was actively, being bombed. And, they've showed no fear. And so that's...
And the rallies were bombed.
Yeah.
That rally where the leaders were participating, they bombed that rally, and the woman was murdered. And there was another rally in Tehran, not far from a studio that I would regularly go to during the war, in a place called Artish Square, very close to the square. And there was a nightly gathering, because every night across the country, people go to the streets now, every single night.
Yeah.
And in huge numbers, in Tehran and elsewhere. It's unbelievable, really, the dedication of people. But in one of the gatherings that's near that square, they fired a missile at the gathering, and a woman was martyred as well.
Before we talk more about that, I want to stay on the negotiations, because I think, what's really interesting that you mentioned is that Steve Witkoff was present, Jared Kushner was present, and so it was JD Vance, who was just on the phone with Bibi Netanyahu, just updating him, asking him, getting approval for the negotiations. What exactly does...
And others. He made a lot of phone calls. Apparently he made maybe a dozen phone calls.
Okay, so what exactly does the United States and Israel want versus what are Iran's demand for peace at this point, or ending this war?
Well, at the beginning of the war, Trump, like at the beginning of the 12-day war, Trump demanded unconditional surrender. And of course, he didn't get that. And then after a while, he changed it. They started sending messages to Iran, and the Iranians ignored the messages for maybe 25, 26 days. After 10 days, the Americans started sending messages to Iran, and the Iranians ignored all. Then the Americans gave this 15-point plan during the 5 days of the war, which was rejected by Iran. And then Iran gave a 10-point plan, which the Americans and Trump agreed would be the basis for discussions, for negotiations. Yeah, of course, Trump later rejected this, as Trump always does, and that's why negotiating with him is almost impossible. But the 10-point Iranian plan that was that the Iranians put forward was reasonable. I mean, if anyone reads it, compensation for a war that was imposed upon the country illegally, respect for Iran's sovereignty, security for people in Lebanon and Gaza and Yemen and Iraq and so on. Nothing extraordinary. But of course, the empire doesn't seem to think that justice is or reasonable demands are valid demands. The empire has special rights and privileges, and no one else apparently has any rights whatsoever. But when the negotiations took place, it was clear that the Americans wanted what they could not gain on the battlefield. They wanted the Iranians to capitulate. And I don't know why they thought that that would be possible after 40 days of war and failure, but they wanted the Iranians to capitulate. And there's also probably another aspect to it, and that is the Americans and the Israelis wanted to regroup and rearm to prepare for another phase of war, which may be is quite possibly upon us as we speak. we may be at war. They may carry out another act of aggression and carry out mass slaughter and murder in the next few hours or the next few days. It's quite possible, if not probable. So um, it's one of these two things, or maybe a combination of both. Maybe they thought that they could get at the negotiating table some extraordinary concessions. They couldn't, and I think they should have known that. And of course, they were quite probably buying time.
And so, what is Iran's plan going forward? It sounds like Iran doesn't want to negotiate with the United States anymore. At least that's what we're hearing from people on the ground inside of Iran. Is that true?
Well, the Americans want to negotiate, but the Iranians are saying that the United States is violating the ceasefire. They've imposed a siege on Iranian ports. That's a violation. They've attacked two ships that are connected to Iran. These are violations. And the Iranians are saying that, well, if you're going to violate the ceasefire agreement, then what's the use? What's the point of negotiating new, issues or negotiating an extension of the ceasefire? Because when you're not committed to your current commitments, you're definitely not going to be committed to new commitments. This is basically it. And so as right now, as we speak, the Iranians have decided they have no plans to go unless there's some change in Washington. If Trump changes his policy or his behavior, then the Iranians may change their decision. But as we speak, I don't know when you're going to publish this, but as we speak, a decision has not been made to go.
Okay, and let's talk about the Strait of Hormuz, because Trump, he sanctioned the Strait of Hormuz after Iran had shut it down and only opened it to its allies. They're now charging in the Chinese yuan to pass, but Trump has double closed it, I guess you could say. And so how is that looking like right now? I mean, is Trump's closure, supposed closure and sanctioning of the Strait of Hormuz working? What is it looking like on the ground in the Strait of Hormuz right now?
Well, we have to remember that Iran did not start the war. I know you know it, and I know your viewers know it, but this is something we always have to remember, because when you listen to Western media, it's as if we started the war. Somehow it's like we're the aggressor, we're the problem. On day one, they murdered 168 little girls at an elementary school, and you think that nothing really happened because Western media is completely indifferent to this, and the United States has never apologized. It's never even acknowledged the crime that it's committed. And it wasn't, and the Iranians are very confident that it was an intentional strike on the school. And the reason is that it was it was a first wave target. And first wave targets are very carefully vetted. They have weeks, if not months, to vet them. If the war is going on for a few weeks and they're looking for a new target, some officer may be in a rush and make some foolish mistake. But that's not what happened here. There was no war. They had ample time. They chose their targets very carefully. This school was well known. It was there for years. It was on all the Iranian apps, the American apps, the Iranian maps, American maps, I'm sure. And but many of the children were children of military officers. And the belief here is that since this was a first wave attack and the target was carefully chosen, the Americans wanted to teach Iranian officers a lesson by slaughtering their kids. And if anyone in the United States thinks this is strange, all they have to do is come to Tehran and look at the places that the Americans and Israelis have been bombing. They've been bombing hospitals. They've been bombing Red Crescent Society buildings. They bombed the National Emergency Center, which is for first responders. They did so many double tap airstrikes, both Americans and Israelis, many across the country. Quite amazing how despicable these pilots are. I mean, the Israeli pilots, obviously, they're all monsters, but it's extraordinary how despicable despicable American pilots are too. So they they widely believe that the Americans carried this out intentionally. Um, I forgot what the question was.
The question was about what is happening on the ground in the Strait of Hormuz. Are ships passing through?
Yes.
Is Trump's, sanctioning of the Strait of Hormuz working?
Sorry, that was the
That's
um,
okay.
yeah, that was the background explanation that, Iran didn't start the war. So when the war started, uh, countries in the Persian Gulf were a part of the war. Kuwait, Qatar, the Emirates, Bahrain, and Saudi Arabia were all a part of this war. And they facilitated the U.S. strikes. They helped U.S. naval forces. They helped U.S. Ground forces. The United States would fire missiles from their territory. They would fire from inside bases and outside bases. U.S. troops would be both inside bases. Later, they were moved outside bases. Their assets were outside the bases and even in ports. And American planes would land in their airports. They would use their military bases. So they were a part of the war. And some of the countries, the Saudis, the Emiratis, and Qatar, were funding the assaults on Iran. So basically, they shut down the Strait of Hormuz for ships linked to these countries and other countries hostile towards Iran. So Iran did not include Russia or China, and then it didn't include Iraq either. After a few days, it said that Iraq is not a part of this. So ships were moving back and forth, but in much smaller numbers during the war. In the ceasefire, the Americans and the Iranians came to an agreement that there would be no more fighting on all fronts, including Lebanon, because there was serious fighting there, and that Iran would open the Strait of Hormuz to further shipping, to more shipping, which would include ships that were from not friendly countries. Yet the Israeli regime refused to carry out the ceasefire. And Netanyahu, I'm sure you recall, carried out that carpet bombing in Beirut and other cities to slaughter people, to wreck the ceasefire. And he killed hundreds of people literally in minutes. And Western media, of course, tried to hide his atrocities by saying these are Hezbollah strongholds or Hezbollah bases, knowing that they were lying because they had journalists in Beirut. And I spoke to two of those journalists. And I told them, why are you writing? Because both two different journalists called me over a couple of days to get to do an interview for me for a piece that they were writing. And I asked both of them, why are you saying Hezbollah strongholds in your reports? And both of them said, no, we didn't do that. And they said that the editor did that, and I said, you're complicit. It's in your name. You have no excuse. You can't say someone else did that. So Western media tried to justify the atrocities and pretend that these were airstrikes on Hezbollah, whereas they weren't. And Western media is based in Beirut, so they don't even have the excuse that they had in Gaza. So in any case, Netanyahu wrecked the ceasefire, and the Iranians said, okay, if you're going to wreck the ceasefire, we're not going to open the Strait of Hormuz to extra shipping. And Iran stopped and put pressure on the Americans. And after 5-6 days, the Americans, while they were apparently putting pressure on Netanyahu, they also began a siege on Iranian ports. Why? Because Iran was not allowing those extra ships to go through because the Israelis were violating the ceasefire. And the Pakistanis said that Lebanon was a part of the ceasefire. Trump later said it wasn't, but he was lying. The Pakistanis said it was. In any case, after the United States imposed this siege, after 2 or 3 days, Netanyahu was forced to accept the ceasefire, and the Iranians said, okay, now we're going to allow that extra shipping to go through. But Trump, in response, said, but I'm keeping my siege in place. When he said that, the Iranians said, okay, if you're going to do that, then we're not going to allow ships to go through. Why? Because you're violating the ceasefire. First, Netanyahu was violating the ceasefire, and now you're violating the ceasefire. So we're not going to open the Strait of Hormuz to those ships. And since Trump said he's going to block all Iranian ships, effectively right now, no ships are passing through. I hear that some Iranian ships quietly pass through, but I don't have details. But of course, the Americans have boarded 2 ships. They struck one and they boarded another. I mean, they struck and boarded one and they boarded another. And so this is where we are right now. The Strait of Hormuz is shut, and the global energy crisis, the global fertilizer crisis, the global helium crisis continues to get worse by literally the minute.
And one of those countries that has actually threatened to join the war if negotiations don't go through and the war doesn't come to an end and it escalates is the UAE, which has been on the international front presenting itself as the victim of Iranian attacks. And we just published an investigation laying out exactly how the UAE is involved in the war against Iran. And so I suggest everybody check that out. We're probably not going to have enough time for me to explain all of the points of this investigation, but something that the UAE's foreign affairs minister has done, her name is Reem Al-Hashimi, is, presented Iran's attacks against the UAE as a form of jealousy. Okay, I know it sounds so funny, but it's true. She has recently come out in this interview, I think it was with ABC News, where she says, the presenter asks her, why do you think, Iran has targeted, bases inside of the UAE? And she says, well, we, the UAE, are everything they are not. We have advanced our society and we have the most beautiful buildings and sophisticated society, and Iran hasn't been able to keep up with us. Such a ridiculous statement from her, but I wanted to get your reaction to this video. I'm going to play it really quick.
You have been attacked by Iran more than any other country, and we put together the numbers here. This is from the Gulf Research Center, and it shows, look at the numbers. I mean, you know them well. You have been attacked more than Israel, more than Saudi Arabia. Why has Iran aimed so much firepower at the UAE?
Thank you very much, John, for having me. Well, in 40 days, we were attacked a little over 2,800 with 2,800 missiles and drones. And for us, it's very clear that they've chosen to go down this path because we are everything that they're not. We're a model of economic prosperity. We have 200 nationalities that live there. We have religions and cultures from all around the world. We used our oil wealth to build an economic powerhouse. They used their wealth for nuclear programs that are nefarious, for missiles, drones, proxies, etc. So whereas we tried to become and have become an international, global, responsible player, they are a pariah state. And they wanted to break that model, but they underestimated our resolve.
So how concerned are you that at the end of this process, even if there is a deal, that Iran will retain the power to continue once again to attack the UAE?
So we're very concerned because we believe that it's really important that as part of a neighborhood that one is in, that you have neighbors that don't just launch these types of weapons against fellow neighbors. I don't know if you're aware, John, but over 90% of all of their targets was actually civilian infrastructure.
So they weren't just going after the U.S. bases or U.S. facilities?
Not at all. And not even the U.S. bases where nothing was actually fired from the U.S. bases, right? So they really wanted to break what it was that made the UAE special, which is this incredible model of prosperity and tolerance. Now, what we're looking at moving forward is how do you live with the reality of geography in a neighborhood that still holds and upholds not just international law, but also how are we going to be able to deal with a team in the IRGC that doesn't have such hostile intentions towards us?
Well, they are a lot of things that Iran is not. They are proxies of the United States. They are allies of the Israeli regime. They are pursuing policies across the Horn of Africa and the Arabian Peninsula that are in the interests of the Israeli regime. So, it is a family dictatorship. Foreign workers have no rights. So, yeah, I'm glad that we don't have that much in common. But the problem with the Emirates and the Qataris and the Bahrainis and the Kuwaitis, and I mean the regimes, and Saudi Arabia, is that they want to have their cake and eat it too. They want to have those American bases, and that they want to help the Americans bomb Iran, refuel over their airspace. Their planes that carry out the refueling land in their bases or base in their airports. They want their artillery, American artillery, to be used against Iran from their territory, but they want to say they're neutral too. So on the one hand, they want to accompany the Americans or assist the Americans in their war of aggression and the slaughter of all these innocent Iranians, including the girls at the Mnar Elementary School. And on the other hand, they want to tell the Iranians that, we have nothing to do with this. It's none of our business. We don't want to get involved. That's, no one is going to buy that. No one accepts that. It's like, for example, in the United States, if the Chinese set up bases in Canada and Mexico and then started firing missiles and bombing the United States from those bases in Canada and Mexico, and also from other bases in Canada and Mexico. And then the Canadians and the Mexicans would tell the Americans, look, we don't want to have anything to do with this. We're neutral. Don't get us involved. It's just ridiculous. And so it's an insult to our intelligence. But the Iranians are going to ignore those statements. The Iranians are, if they are attacked again, and it seems that the chances for war are very high right now, and Trump claims that he's going to be far more barbaric and evil than he's been so far, then the Iranians are going to definitely retaliate. They will strike Israeli critical infrastructure, but they'll also strike the critical infrastructure of the regimes in the Persian Gulf region, no doubt about it. They can't participate in the destruction of Iranian critical infrastructure and then expect theirs to remain intact. That only invites further aggression against Iran.
So I'm going to get your reaction to another thing, which is the main Quran reciter, one of the most famous Quran reciters, Mnar Adley. He's very well known. He just released a new nasheed, which is like an Islamic song, saying, may the Iranian hands perish and those who support Iran perish, and basically go to hell. I mean, it's a really ironic Islamic song because it has no roots in Islam whatsoever. It's very much a political song. But I think, Mnar Adley really disappointed a lot of people because, he's one of the most well-known and famous Quran reciters. I mean, I have to admit that I've listened to his recitations of the Quran. Billions of people around the world have listened to his recitations of the Quran. His voice is very beautiful. However, since the war against Iran started, he has been tweeting endlessly about praying for the Gulf Arab leaders. He's been supporting Trump's actions against Iran, and he's really been pushing like a sectarian narrative against Iran that, Shias are not even really Muslim and they're the aggressors. Where the hell was Mnar Adley when Israel was committing genocide in Gaza? Did he put in the effort to, create an Islamic nasheed or song to produce one against Israel? No, he didn't. He is acting in line with the Gulf Arab states, normalization with the United States, and pushing this sectarian narrative against Iran. And this one song and these few tweets completely destroyed his reputation online because the global majority is on Iran's side, and they see that the United States and Israel are the aggressors. And it is really exposing kind of this Wahhabi Salafist, takeover of Islam and the Islamic culture and the nasheeds and the Quran apps and so forth. And, they're calling him out, which is a really good thing. I mean, one of the main newspapers in Palestine, Al-Quds newspaper, has come out and completely destroyed Mash'ar al-Afasi and have said they've denounced him and said, we denounce this song. It's not even Islamic, it's political. Iran is not the enemy. Iran is not the enemy. The ones who are dropping bombs on innocent children and their schools, targeting over 307 hospitals and medical facilities and vaccine research facilities in Iran, those are the real terrorists and the aggressors. It's not Iran. And I didn't mean to go on a rant here, but we're all affected by this. This is affecting the Middle Eastern culture. And so what is your reaction to this new wave of political propaganda that's coming out against Iran from this Islamic establishment?
Well, he was definitely praying for the death of the Iranians, and yes, they did burn alive. I mean, the girls in the Mnar school, very little exists of their bodies. They've been what's the word when there's nothing left? They've been vaporized for the most part.
Vaporized, yeah.
And of course the vaccine research center that was utterly destroyed. That will lead to many people dying. I guess that's something that pleases him. This whole Wahhabi and Salafi extremist trend in the region, in the world, began actually soon after the revolution. After the Islamic Revolution, the United States and these Arab dictatorships and the Israelis, they were all concerned about the spread of the revolutionary movement. And of course, just like Iran, which had a despot, a family dictatorship, we had the same across the region. And so they countered this by, first the Saudis, by promoting Salafism and Wahhabism. And they spread it across the region and across the world. So there was, to a large extent, to counter the revolution in Iran. And also it was also used in Afghanistan against the Soviet Union. The first Takfiri school books were actually published in the United States because back then the Saudis didn't have those capabilities. So they were published at Nebraska Omaha University by Nebraska Omaha University Press. School books for children on the border of Pakistan and Afghanistan to make them sort of Takfiri and so that they would be hostile to the Soviet Union and the Soviet Army and the Soviets as people who should be killed. But also later on, Qatar and the others became much more involved. And sadly, Erdogan began using this tool as well, both in Libya. During the Arab Spring, these oil and gas-rich regimes in the Persian Gulf used Takfiri forces and Al-Qaeda in particular to bring down Gaddafi in Libya and Gaddafi in Libya. And then, of course, in Syria, they carried out this operation under the umbrella of the Timber Sycamore operation that was initiated by Obama. So these forces have always been tools of the U.S. empire. And it's very interesting that, for example, Al-Qaeda, a decade after 9/11, and if one is to believe the official story of 9/11, and people like Tucker Carlson don't believe it, the official narrative, as you can see from his documentary, and it's clear that he believes that Israeli intelligence and perhaps elements of the U.S. intelligence were involved. But Al-Qaeda, which we were told carried out 9/11, literally a decade later, it was being used to overthrow the Libyan government. And so these Wahhabi groups are used as tools for divide and rule, and they've never harmed the interests of the Israeli regime. You don't see any elements of these. You don't see any of these groups attacking Israel. In fact, when during the Syrian dirty war, they would target the Syrians and they would get funding and support from Israel. And their soldiers, their troops or the terrorists were treated in Israeli regime hospitals. So so now they're trying to use these people for Iran, even though Mohammed bin Salman has distanced himself from Wahhabism, but they're using these people in order to demonize Iran. And so, ever since I was young, when I'd go to Saudi Arabia, I would meet some of these Wahhabi students at university. They would be like studying Islam, and they would tell me that you have a different Quran. I say,
I've heard that before. Yeah. I've heard them say that. Yes.
Yeah. And like, these are not like villagers. These are like those who are studying, that their job is to study Islam and to go and become clerics in mosques across the world. And so they'd say your prophet you have a different prophet. Your Quran is, all sorts of very strange things.
Yeah.
And very bizarre. And yet, and no matter how much you spoke with them, it was very difficult speaking to them, because they get angry very quickly, animated very quickly, and you'd often feel that they were on the verge of violence.
Yeah.
During Hajj, like sitting by the Kaaba, the holy Kaaba, or in the Prophet's mosque. But in any case, yeah, that's basically, these are tools of empire. And obviously these people will direct their hostility towards Iran. They've never shown any hostility towards the Israeli regime. They've never supported the Palestinian people. They've never, it's very interesting. The only country that has supported the Palestinian cause is Iran. Yemen, of course, under Ansarullah more recently, but no one else is doing anything for them. Building a hospital somewhere or giving scholarships to a few students are mostly soft power, and are done in order to enhance a country's own image. But to actually do something and help them protect themselves is what gets you sanctioned. It's what gets you demonized. And it's not just Palestine. It's also Bosnia. Bosnia, when it was being wiped out, it was the Iranians who went in and helped them and saved the country. If it wasn't for the Iranians, there would be no Bosnia. They're not Shia or anything like that. Iran's friendships are based on whether a nation is standing up to the empire. In the case of Syria, Iran never cared who the president of Syria was. He could have been Christian, he could have been Druze, he could have been Sunni, he could have been Alawite, he could have been Shia. But the fact that the Americans wanted to destroy the Syrian government, the fact that from well before 2011, the plan was to undermine the Syrian government because it would benefit Israel, was what caused Iran to stand up against it. Just like Iran does not have good relations with the Republic of Azerbaijan, which is a Shia country, because it is an ally of the Israeli regime. So Iran's friendships are based on their stance towards empire and towards Zionism. Iran is very friendly to Cuba. It's communist. It's very friendly to Venezuela. Its country's been taken hostage now, but in any case, you get the point.
Yeah.
So these people, they don't have any principles, and they are basically funded by these very wealthy regimes that are proxies of the United States.
Of course, and it's quite obvious that sectarianism has been pushed onto the region, onto the Muslim world. That saying that, really racist Americans use, they've been fighting for thousands of years. It's simply not true. And this sectarianism really erupted after the Iraq War, after the US invaded Iraq. And they imposed that onto the region. It's always been a U.S. tactic for divide and conquer, and an Israeli tactic for divide and conquer. And I remember reading a study, I think it was right before 9/11, 2001, September 11, 2001, the majority of the Arab and Muslim world supported Iran, supported Hezbollah. And so it was actually a tactic to use the Iraq war and the war in Syria to kind of flip the support flip the support of Iran and Hezbollah against them, and make people in the Middle East and the Muslim world against Hezbollah and Iran, because that 2001 study actually showed that the greatest threat to peace in the region, if you interviewed people in the Middle East and the Muslim world, they always said Israel. But after the war in Syria, a lot of Muslims would say it's actually Iran, and it was because of that propaganda. But now the narrative has flipped again, and people are seeing like, oh my gosh, we were propagandized. The war in Syria really was for resources, and that sectarianism was pushed upon us. It wasn't real, and the people and the countries who are actually supporting liberation in the region, or Palestinian liberation, are Iran, Lebanon, and Yemen. And so all of that propaganda has been exposed because Israel really shot itself in the foot when it launched that genocide against Gaza, and now they're committing another genocide inside of Lebanon. And we have to remember that these Gulf Arab states are 100% complicit in every single action that the United States and Israel commit in the region to colonize us. I mean, these countries are they're standing on such fragile soil. I mean, the communities there, the people there, the majority of the people there don't even support their governments, and they see that the United States, Israel, and these Gulf monarchies are the reason for these wars. And I did get my notes back up about the UAE's secret role in the U.S.-Israeli war on Iran. And I know a lot of these things, but I wanted to have my note just to make sure that everything I state is like on point and accurate. So obviously, despite the UAE has been presenting itself publicly as a neutral victim, we now know from this investigation that we published at Mint Press that Emirati fighter jets bombed Iran's Lavan oil refinery after the 2-week ceasefire was declared. That's one point of the investigation. Second point is that the UAE reportedly allowed its air bases to be used for operations against Iran, including an Israeli false flag attack targeting Oman. We also know that 2 Emirati Wing Loon 2 drones were shot down over Iranian airspace. We also know that the UAE has an integrated air defense system with Israel, feeding it early warning data to detect Iranian incoming strikes. We also know that the UAE has reportedly lobbied the U.S. to continue its war after the ceasefire, and has said that it will enter the war, and has threatened to take the Iranian islands in the Strait of Hormuz. The UAE has reportedly deployed Israeli ELM 2084 radars in Somalia to track incoming Yemeni missiles against Tel Aviv. So they're assisting Israel in stopping those missiles. Iran has also accused the Emiratis of seeking to allow their territory as a launching pad for a ground assault on Persian Gulf islands that I mentioned. Abu Dhabi was also revealed to have signed a $2.3 billion contract with Israeli weapons from Elbit Systems. For those who have read our investigations into Elbit Systems, because of the protests against Elbit Systems and the destruction of the property inside of the UK, with the community standing against them, where did Israel go to build their largest weapons factory? Inside of the UAE. Elbit Systems Emiratis, it is called. And so the UAE is 100% complicit in this war, and also the genocide inside of Gaza. We also know that Abu Dhabi built field hospitals inside of Gaza that were apparently being used to spy on Palestinians and to collect intelligence on Palestinians that were being bombed and genocided by Israel, and providing that intelligence to the Israeli government. And then we know that, of course, the UAE continues to deny its participation in the genocide in Sudan, but we've also at Mint Press tracked all of the flights from the UAE to Ethiopia and Sudan carrying weapons, and those are by the dozens every couple of months. And so that's what the UAE is. It's I would say, one of the main complicit states helping the state of Israel and the United States commit war crimes in the Middle East and against Muslims. Did you want to add anything else to that, Dr. Marandi?
Yeah, the UAE is the most open about it, but others are all pretty bad too. None of them have. The UAE has been very crude in its open support of the Israeli regime, and it's not even subtle about it. Yeah. In the case of Qatar and the Saudis, and well, Bahrain is more like that, much more open about it than the others. But the Qatar and the Saudis and Kuwait, they're more quiet about the relationship. But they have a very good relationship with the Israelis. The head of Israeli military intelligence has traveled to Qatar. The head of Mossad. There are lots of communications that have been going on over the years. I think I was in Doha once. I'm not quite sure, but I'm pretty sure. I'm getting old and forgetful. But I've been invited by Al Jazeera multiple times in the past, back in the day. Back then, when it was actually Al Jazeera was pretty good, like before 2011, when it became propaganda. Back during the 2, 3, 4 years when it was pretty good. I think I was in Doha invited by Al Jazeera, and simultaneously Shimon Peres was there too, and he went to the studio. I recall being there at the time, but I'd have to check. I'm growing, as I said, I'm growing old. But this is how. These are the relationships that these countries have, and of course Kushner, who is a rabid Zionist, is he gets money from all of these regimes for his investments. They're all, and the same is true with Witkoff. So these 5 regimes, with all the wealth that they have, they've done so much harm to our region. They've all been involved in the bombing of Yemen. They were all, we Iranians, of course, hate Saddam Hussein. In the 1980s, these Arab regimes funded Saddam Hussein, and they spread sectarianism and racism in the 1980s against Iran. But when Saddam invaded Kuwait and they turned against him, after years of sanctions, when the United States ultimately in 2003 wanted to invade Iraq, they supported this. They gave the United States access to their territory and their bases to invade the country. And Iran was opposed to the invasion of Iraq. Iran, despite the hostility towards Saddam, said that the United States did not have the legitimate right to invade the country. In fact, they gave Saddam the chemical weapons. The West gave him chemical weapons, which was used as an excuse in 2003 for them to invade the country, whereas the weapons no longer existed. It was a lie. But when back then, when Saddam did have those chemical weapons to use against Iranians and against his own people, they were given to him with the money of these Arab regimes and the technology of Western countries, Germany in particular. So these countries were involved in the genocidal war against Yemen. They were involved in the invasion of Iraq. They were involved in the dirty war in Syria and helping ISIS and Al-Qaeda. And, of course, they had no involvement in supporting the people of Gaza in the face of Israeli genocide.
And I want to end on the topic of Lebanon. We just have about 7 minutes left, so this will be one of my final questions for you. I want to talk about Lebanon because it's part of the negotiations for Iran. Iran wants to include, Israel not bombing Lebanon, ceasing to commit a genocide and war crimes inside of Lebanon. But obviously, Israel doesn't want to. They've actually broken the ceasefire by continuing to attack Lebanon. They're trying to get into Bint Jbeil and occupy the south. The media keeps presenting this as, oh, they're trying to build, a security barrier between itself and Hezbollah. But no, they are ethnically cleansing the south of the Muslim Shias. They've made that announcement. And they want to occupy and steal the land. In fact, we have major settler groups, crying about how they're just so excited to set up their settler posts to expand into Lebanon and steal those lands, steal those homes so that they can expand their greater Israel plan. Of course, they're like openly saying it, but the media just like gaslights us and like, no, Israel's building a security barrier. It's so horrible. But Israel's committing a similar genocide in Lebanon that it did in Gaza. They're targeting hospitals. They're targeting the paramedics. They're targeting the ambulances. I mean, I think they've killed like already hundreds, if not dozens, of the paramedics. Right. And so, what is your?
Have you seen any of your government condemn them? Have you seen any American, any major journal in Europe and North America call for sanctions against the Israeli regime? No, they can act with impunity and they will have full support. And unlike in Gaza, where Western journalists lied and said, well, we cannot confirm anything because we don't have a presence in Gaza, in Lebanon, they have a very strong presence. True. All of the Western key news agencies have offices in Beirut, and they have fixers, they have drivers, they have producers who live in these areas, who live in the south, who live in different parts. They know that they're lying. They have, as I said, two of them. Their excuse to me was that that's not what I wrote. I sent my report to the editor, and he added, or she added, or whoever it was, added like these Hezbollah stronghold phrases and things like that. They're all lying. And that's because Western media is captured by the Epstein class. The oligarchy owns the media. The oligarchy owns the government. This is far worse. What we have today in the West is far worse than when Chomsky was writing about manufactured consent and at that time when his critique of the was so important, regardless of Chomsky's issues.
What we know about him now.
But But in any case, now it is infinitely worse than when he wrote that book. It's just not. I don't think you can really compare the situation today to back then. And it's when I appear on Western media, it's just so bizarre how if I say the genocide in Gaza, the interviewer will correct me and say, no, this has not been proven by, they will constantly call Iran a regime. They call Hamas or Hezbollah a terrorist. I mean, the terminology is standard, whether it's Sky News or the BBC or CNN or MSNBC or Fox News. There's no difference. Some are more bombastic and some are more subtle, but there's no real difference when it comes to Palestine, whether it's The Guardian or whether it's Breitbart.
Of course. And we love seeing you go on Piers Morgan and the many news outlets that you go on, even the British ones, to challenge Western corporate media narratives. Your voice is very much needed and important to, stand in contrast to the propaganda machine that we've been fed for so long. And we underestimate the difference that we're making. Sometimes we're fighting and we're talking and we're publishing and we're like, is this really making a difference? We feel exhausted and tired sometimes, but it is. It's, for decades, we've been planting these seeds about what's happening. And now the global majority has awoken. It took a lot of effort, but the global majority has awoken. But anyways, Dr. Marandi, we're glad to see you safe. We're glad to see you alive. We're glad to see you still standing strong against the wind. And it's always an honor and pleasure to have you on here to hear your perspective on the state of affairs. Thank you so much.
The honor is mine, and I'm very grateful for being invited on your show.
Thank you.